Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to our welcome and the opening of our conference. We're just going to go ahead and wait for a few moments and let folks trickle in. But good morning and happy Thursday.
Good morning.
Okay, let's go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to Reclaiming Our Love, the network's first annual social justice and domestic violence conference. I'm going to begin by turning the screen over to Lauren Miller for a land acknowledgement. There will be time directly following for Lauren to answer a couple questions you may have. So please prepare those if interested and put them in the Q&A. Welcome, Lauren.
Mado Hesche, which is hello in my language. I don't know, has the video started?
Yes.
Okay. It says unable to start video. Okay. Can you see my land acknowledgement on the screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, that's the important part. So Hesche, that's hello in my language. My name is Lauren Miller. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an Afro-Indigenous cisgender woman. And what that means is I'm African-American and Muskogee Creek of Oklahoma, where I'm a part of one of the 48 federal, well, there's 550 something tribes, but we're called the 48 federal recognized tribes because we're in the 48 states. And as Tere said, today we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Now, some of you may be familiar with land acknowledgements, some of you may have given them, some of you may be well more versed than I, but the purpose of a land acknowledgement is to acknowledge the Aboriginal/Indigenous people who were the original inhabitants of this land and are still here. I am one of those people. And it isn't something that should just be done like, oh, it's a trendy thing to do, or because, it's an obligatory thing to do. It should be done with a lot of heart and feeling, because when we think about reclaiming love, right? Reclaiming our love for the land and acknowledgement of the original people here is one way of starting to undo the systematic genocide and violence and all those negative things that have impacted people of color and Indigenous people across the globe. So please join me as we begin. If we were in an auditorium, I'd probably have you all stand up and face to the east, because in the Great Lakes area, we tend to do that, but no need necessarily to do that unless you feel inspired. So I will begin. I've put the text on the screen so you can read along. And if you have any other questions, as Tere said, we can talk at the end. So let's begin. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are currently occupying the ancestral lands of the Council of the Three Fires, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, as well as over a dozen of their nations that have ancestral claims and relationships to this land and its waterways. For anyone who may not be joining us from the Chicagoland area, I hope you take a moment to acknowledge who holds the relations to the land you occupy. Let us acknowledge that the words Chicago and Illinois have survived despite our settler colonial society waging war on the language of the lands. The languages that hold the greatest knowledge of how to live and reciprocity. Recognition for us, Illinois is the second most manipulated landscape in the United States of the indigenous nations of this region, and have been victims of settler violence that has degraded our lands, waterways, putting us in the midst of a climate crisis. The waterways that sustain us have been weaponized to forcibly remove and segregate communities. Nevertheless, Chicago today and since time immemorial is indigenous. Reclaiming our love is understanding our past and how we've come to occupy our current land. My history, my family, is from one of these lands. And I urge every one of you to reckon with how you've historically come to occupy the land in which you do, and to learn the truths, no matter how violent, uncomfortable, and emotional they may be. Once we are able to understand the truths of the land, we can reimagine a new world. I want to end with this quote from Leanne Simpson, an Anishinaabe, which is a branch of the Ojibwe nations, as a reflection on how to conduct yourself in Nanishbeg lands. Recognition for us is about the presence, about the profound listening, and about recognizing and affirming the light in each other as the mechanism for nurturing and strengthening internal relationships to our Nishanabeg worlds. It is a core part of our political systems because they are rooted in our bodies, and our bodies are not just informed but by created and maintained by relationships of deep reciprocity. Our bodies exist in relation to indigenous complex, non-linear constructs of time, space, and place that are continually rebirthed throughout the practice and often coded recognition of obligations and responsibilities within a nest of diversity, freedom, and constant non-interfaith and generated proportional emergent reciprocity. And this was again from Leanne Simpson, as we have always done, Indigenous freedom of thought and radical resistance. So I'd like to begin that I didn't write this. This was written by the amazing Fawn Pochel, who is First Nations Cree from Canada, but is also the education coordinator for the Chicago American Indian Center here in Chicago. And this is Fawn's information. I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can regarding a land acknowledgement, but for a more in-depth perspective, if you would like, say, a land acknowledgement done at your company or your agency or your school, I would encourage you to reach out to Fawn, and this information can be made available to you in your agency if you'd like to reach out, because this is something they do. They have a template, they talk about it, and they provide a lot of information on it. So why don't we sit with this just for a few seconds, and then let's begin by opening it up to some questions. Oh, I don't need to make it big. Okay. So are there any questions or reflections people would like to share at this moment? Okay. Have people had experiences with land acknowledgements? I'm just curious. Okay. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions. Wait, now the chat's coming in. Yes, now I'm seeing things. Thank you. Yes, good. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of panelists saying yes, they have had experiences with land acknowledgements. And thank you to Sayla Clark. You said that, yes, the idea of sitting instead of being perfunctory is so important. Thank you for your comment. Are there any panelists who've actually given land acknowledgements? Oh, good. Mayor, thank you for your reflections. You said sometimes meetings I've attended have started with land acknowledgements, which is a great way to start. I absolutely agree. And Katie asked, hi, what are the three fires again? Thank you. Good question. So the three fires are Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. So those are branches of the Anishinaabe group. They're from this area, the Woodlands area, the Great Lakes area, and they're the original inhabitants of this area. There are other tribes too, such as Ho-Chunk, Illinois, hence the name Illinois itself is based on a tribe, and others. But during the time of relocation, meaning when natives were forcibly relocated from their traditional spots in the US to new spots, they were, forced to leave the land. So when we do a land acknowledgement, we're acknowledging that maybe a tribe is in another state, but actually they're from here. So like, for example, my tribe, the Muskogee Creek, we're originally from northern Georgia, northern Alabama, and northern Mississippi. And then in like the like around 1803 or so, we were forcibly removed from the northern part of the Southeast to Oklahoma. And so now my tribe is in Ocmulgee, Oklahoma. And while we are from Oklahoma, all tribal affiliation is from Oklahoma, our original land are the areas I named. So if I were in Georgia doing a land acknowledgement, we would acknowledge the Muskogee Creek as one of the tribes there, along with the other tribes that were originally from there, even though they are no longer, well, some are, but a lot of them are not there anymore. And then there are other tribes that have come in who were relocated into those areas and have also made this land theirs. So a land acknowledgement is about acknowledging historical ties as well as current ties. Mayor said, we were given a phone number to text, and we would get text feedback saying those land, whose land you were residing in. Sure. Okay, so Mayor, it looks like, is saying that there is a number that can be shared that'll say, like, you can text this number and it'll say, like, which group a particular tribe was originally from. Please feel free to share that with Tere, Mayor. Also, too, if you go online to, I believe, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it should list what current tribes are in what part of the state, and there's usually a link to list where tribes were originally from. Also, most states tend to have some form of Indian Center. So like Chicago's Indian Center, which is listed on the slide with Fawn's information. Let me go back. You could contact them. Here it is. You could contact the Indian Center here and you could find out about Illinois specifically. Either Fawn herself could, pronouns are she, her, could answer these questions. Another person who potentially would be anyone who works there. There's a culture and education person by the name of David Spencer, definitely. And thank you, Network, for sharing that link. Thank you, Katie, for acknowledging the SM.
Hi, Lauren. This is Tere.
Mm-hmm.
You had asked if any panelists have been doing land acknowledgements. We started at the network's 40-hour training. We started opening them up with a land acknowledgement a few months ago, and that was after we got someone to do a section in our 40-hour on Indigenous folks.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's really, really beautiful to hear. Talk about the steady practice of, beginning to reclaim. And I know other agencies in Chicago have as well. The Newberry Library has, I believe two of the major museums have, what used to be the Chicago History Museum, I think, or Historical Society. Now the History Museum has done it. So this is a practice that's being incorporated because it's about, acknowledging who's here and who was, and, acknowledging that history. So thank you, Tere.
Lauren, are you able to see the Q&A? There's one question you've already answered, but there's another in there as well.
Okay, I see two. So anonymous attendee, is that the one you're referring to?
I was talking about Diana's only because the anonymous one you had talked about previously.
Now I see it. Thank you, Tere. Diana asks, where do you begin to research your past history and what do you recommend? Good question, Diana. Apologies, I'm not seeing it earlier. So one of the best ways to do it is to contact the Newberry Library. I'll be very honest with you. The Newberry Library is located here in Chicago. The majority of resources are free. It has one of the most extensive genealogy facilities in the city, and it's not just for Native genealogy, but there is a specific section that focuses on both Native and African American genealogy, I will say. Each tribe has a website. And so if you know what tribe your family's from, or if you are curious, like, hey, I heard a rumor in my family that my great grandma was, from this tribe or was Native, look up the tribes that are currently in your state, see if there is a website for that tribe. So again, if I didn't know I was Creek, I would have looked up tribes that were originally from Georgia, and I would have seen most are in Oklahoma, and I would have gone to these tribal websites. Each tribe will say what's needed to become a member of that tribe. It's often referred to as blood quantum. That just simply means that each tribe has a designation as to how you can join that tribe based on the amount of ancestry you have in your background. So like some tribes like mine, there's no blood quantum limit. So like I'm primarily African American, but I'm like an eighth Muskogee Creek, but that's not a barrier to joining my tribe because basically as long as you can prove you have an ancestor who was Creek based on a census, you can join. Other tribes, like I know Mississippi Choctaw, they tend to be, you have to either be fully fully Mississippi Choctaw or half, otherwise you can't join. It's very arbitrary based on tribal rules. Even if you have missed the blood quantum to join a tribe, that's okay. You can still get a letter of descendancy from the tribe once you've shown documentation that you are actually from that tribe. And one way to do that is through death certificates, because not everyone had birth certificates, but for some reason, everyone has a death certificate. And some people also, what they call are on censuses. Big census for Southeastern tribes like mine are the Dawes rolls. So your best bet to answer your question, Diana, is to go to the Newberry, or virtually go since we're in the time of COVID still, and to basically just give the information you have to the genealogist in the McNichols section. They will let you know, okay, these were the tribes probably in this area. Look at their website, see if there's some connection, like a last name seems to be, in this tribe. They will tell you like, okay, you're going to want to look up this death record or this census roll because these were applicable to that tribe. And you should be able to find how you were connected to, which tribe you were connected to and whether you can enroll or at least connect. And I will say most tribes are very inviting about people finding their information. The thing about being forcibly removed, we were all scattered rather. So some people refer to it as going home. So you're taking your time to go home. So people tend to be welcoming and encouraging to work with you to find this information because many of us had lost records. So I hope that helps on that end. Katie asked, I've read an article from the Native activists in Chicago. They mentioned the indigenous name Chigagu for Chicago. Oh, Chicago. Okay. Do you have any recommendations for honoring the original names of the land? That is a good question. So I know Chicago or Chicago, or the way you pronounce it, has slight different pronunciations because there are 5 different tribes that have claimed right to that name. Some say it means stinky cabbage. Others say it means skunk cabbage. Some say onion. We could go on. I would say that contacting the tribes that are originally from here and asking them what their perspective is, because each tribe is a different culture and they're going to have a different way of honoring the name. So as I mentioned in the opening, the Potawatomi are an original group from Chicago. They have tribal headquarters here. You can reach out to them. Ho-Chunk is office, which is an indigenous tribe from here, from Chicago, has an office on Milwaukee Avenue. You can reach out to them. Or you can just reach out to the Indian Center, which is kind of like a collective for all the different tribes coming here, and say, hey, I'm curious, how do we reclaim and honor this name in following the traditions that are from here? And I'm sure Fawn or Melanie Cerna, who's the interim executive director, would be happy to talk to you more about that. So I truly hope that helps with that question. These are great questions, by the way. Any others?
Lauren, I think that's all we have time for.
Fair enough. Well, in my language, we don't have a word for goodbye because we know we're going to see you again. So I will say mado, which is thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you everyone for attending. We're gonna move on into the rest of our welcome. Thank you for coming together in this virtual space to learn, to grow, and intentionally shape the work that we're doing. Our hope is that this conference provides you with tools to care for our shifting world through anti-oppression strategies, alternative methods of advocacy, and healing practices. This is a space of interactive knowledge exchange where wisdom is found around the table and really deepening into how and why we show up for anti-violence work. We have a variety of offerings throughout the 2 days that we will be together. I'm going to cover some of them now. Before I do that, if you would like your closed caption turned on, you can click on CC live transcript at the bottom and click show subtitle. I hope everyone who was there enjoyed Peregrine this morning, who guided us through yoga. Our keynote speaker, Feminista Jones, is speaking later today. I want to invite everyone to sign up to perform or either to attend our open mic. It's free. You can invite your loved ones to register via our Eventbrite, and sign up information is on our Instagram. You're also welcome to attend and witness each other's work. There are going to be 2 network support staff in each room, 1 support person and 1 tech person. They will be named, their name and then support person, their name and then tech person. Please remain muted while others are speaking while on Zoom to avoid feedback. You will find questions in your program for each day to reflect and vision on your own anti-violence work as well as the agency that you work at. Please be aware that some sessions will be recorded. You will see in the upper left corner whether we are recording or not, and choose if you would like to be on camera for that. Compiled resources for each part of the conference is on our Padlet. That link can be found near the end of your program. We have a lunch break social hour both days. If folks are looking to connect, to network and chat, that's the space for you. We, the network staff, ask for patience and understanding if and when tech issues occur. This is the largest virtual event the network has put on. We have already dealt with a tech issue, which is why we started late today. Please make sure to join each section of the conference using the current Zoom link in your agenda, as we are having to make a few changes to those Zoom links. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to uplift the call to stop Asian hate and honor the lives of the women killed at the hands of a white supremacist. I'm going to read out 2 tweets. One is by @JezChung, that's JEZZCHUNG. Quote, "Stop Asian hate means call out white supremacy and dismantle it. Stop Asian hate means learn from and move alongside Black liberation and disability justice. Stop Asian hate means demand visibility and don't settle there. Stop Asian hate means abolish ICE and stop deportations." And one from Mia Arsato, that's @MIARSATO. Quote, "Protect Asian women, Asian massage parlor employees, Asian sex workers, Asian nail techs, undocumented Asian people, poor Asian folks, Asian people who don't have security in networks and who can't go to the police for protection. We have to protect us." End quote. Let's have a short moment of silence to honor these women. Thank you everyone for being here once again. I'm going to pass it over to Mensen and Francesca.
Thank you, Tede. I'm Francesca Rossi. I don't think you could start my video, but that's okay. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white cisgendered woman with brown hair, facial piercings, and there's a green blanket and a wall of pictures behind me. I'm a survivor of intimate partner violence and sexual assault. I run Thriving Through, which is a therapeutic practice dedicated to those who have experienced digital violence and intimate partner violence.
Hi, sorry, I'm working on some back end things. I'm wondering if Lauren, maybe if you could stop screen sharing so I can screen share. Thank you. In the meantime, good morning, everybody. I'm Mensen. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a Norwegian and American white genderqueer femme woman. I am a survivor of intimate partner terrorism, hate violence, attempted femicide, and stalking. I'm a public interdisciplinary artist, community educator, and creative strategist.
We are grateful to be here with each of you today as we cultivate presence and love in each other's lives. This virtual conference is a living example of how expansive the love for our communities are. But our hearts are heavy today as we mourn the 8 femicides of Asian women this week. We know that white supremacy, misogyny, and domestic terrorism are inextricably linked to domestic violence. We need each other as we work to end all forms of gender-based violence. Today, we present to you the guide, How Communities Can Support Survivors of Stalking. Both of us have been stalked for fucking years, and this is a resource that we needed for our communities as they tried and still try their best to support us. Resources for this type of violence focus on victim safety, self-advocacy, and the expansion of carceral interventions. We have found limited to zero tools for community intervention and support. We created this guide for the people who love us and the people who love you. Stalking is abuse. It is domestic violence. And while stalking can happen to anyone, it is more likely to occur before, during, and after an intimate relationship. More than half of stalkers are current or former intimate partners. 3 out of 4 stalking victims have also experienced violence and/or coercive control during their relationship. Stalking is a race, class, and gender issue. Black and Indigenous women are stalked at higher rates, along with LGBTQIA people. We know that statistics are underreported and do not fully represent the experiences we witness. Technology enables stalking. With our lives being forced online, privacy can feel inaccessible. We know that stalking in and through the digital space has increased, especially for women of color, queer and trans people, and those advocating for social equity. How communities show up for survivors of stalking is a central issue for social justice and domestic violence. It's essential for us to find new ways to move through this abuse. Looking to our communities can help us shape what safety looks and feels like. Because stalking is its own brand of fear. It requires us to find solutions to impossible situations. The way to end this type of violence is for the person doing the harm to stop. But how do we do this without engaging the criminal legal system? We know that looking to the carceral state for protection can be just as dangerous as confronting our abusers. We are not responsible for the harm that is done to us, but we are responsible for each other. During stalking, we can be cast out of our communities because fear is contagious. We have to move towards the people we care for, not away from them. How do we offer grace to ourselves and our loved ones in the midst of the scariest periods of our lives?
How Communities Can Support Survivors of Stalking is a tool to help us do just that. This guide contains concrete education about how to support a person experiencing stalking, including understanding trauma, consensual communications, digital safety, threat monitoring, economic justice, upstanding, and creating community support networks with concrete steps on how we can protect our community spaces. I've made some coloring pages, mindful coloring pages that are also in the guide. So as you work through the guide, you have a little space to care for yourself. This resource is for you. So it includes ways to learn how to best support yourself as you help your loved one. This guide is a tool to help us move towards each other as a pathway to justice and healing when it comes to the abuse of stalking. But it's only really effective if it can reach everybody who needs it and covers what each of our communities need. So this is where you come in. We really need your feedback on it. In your program, you'll see a link. It's pointed out here in the bottom left with an advanced review to the copy, and it's right in the program book. We really appreciate it if you could take some time to read it, review it, and tell us your thoughts, feedback, and most importantly, your needs. The guide itself is going to be available and released for free to the public next week. And we'll also be doing a webinar on May 11th that's also free. And you can sign up for that here on the same link. We both believe that our communities can and should be sites for safety, healing, and love. And by building strength with one another to intervene where this violence exists, we can create an infrastructure for this new world that we want to live in. You're all each doing that already today just by being here at the Networks Conference, Reclaiming Our Love. Our contact info is in the guide. You can also see it right down here on the bottom right. Both Fran and I thrive on collaboration and community building. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Francesca and Mensen. Thank you for giving us an advanced look at the guide you're releasing. In case folks recognize the artwork, Mensen drew some beautiful pieces, some drawing pages in our program, as well as the promo image that we have out for the conference. So thank you for that as well. We're now going to turn it back over to Lauren Miller, who will be sharing an ancestral story of resilience and survivorship. Given the nature of the work that we do that regards violence, we will be talking about some heavy subjects throughout these 2 days. Remember that deep topics require deep breaths. Please listen to your body and take care of how it asks, whether by being off camera, taking a walk, getting some water, etc. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you. Let me turn it back on. Okay. And apologies to the previous presenters on leaving the screen up. I'm a little new to Zoom. So with that being said, so my mother is the one who did the reading of this story. I wrote this story. It's based on my great-great-grandmother who is seated there in the portrait. She was a cisgendered African-American, well, actually a biracial American, half African-American, half French. The cisgendered female standing to her left is my great-great-aunt Emily, also African-American and European-American. And this is their story. As Tere said, there are some trigger warnings because it does involve sexual assault. I, like the previous presenters, am also a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so the story is a way of reclaiming, I guess, the historical narrative that impacts us all, as the other panelists said. So please feel free to listen and ask me as many questions as you like afterwards. Okay.
In America, many people know the stories of Harriet Tubman and her courageous night journeys to the North with escaping slaves in search of freedom. Many people know the stories of the powerful orator, Sojourner Truth, who spoke passionately against the evils of slavery and fought for women's rights in a time when women could not vote. But what of the other women, also born into slavery? Those who also toiled the land, nursed the sick, brought up children. Those who also were beaten, raped, sold, and abused. Those who also loved and were loved, dreamed, and often found freedom. These are the women whose names have been lost to time, but who are the very matriarchs of my culture and of America. This is the story of one such woman, and her name was Armanita. Although lost to history, Armanita has made an impression on my heart, as she was my great-great-grandmother. She was born to an Afro-Creole woman who was a house slave and the woman's French owner. Like so many slaves, Armanita was not given a surname. only a first name, as a way of identifying her along with the other household items. The French owner did not see Armanita as his daughter. He did not even see her as a child, just another household item. Therefore, when the Frenchmen who loved to gamble and had a taste for fine wines and velvets ran out of money, he sold Armanita, along with several other household items, to an Englishman from his gentleman's club. At the age of 12, Armanita was placed on the back of a horse-drawn cart, along with food and furnishings, headed for the home of her new owner. She never saw her mother again, or her friends, or her siblings. Armanita was ostensibly bought in order to cook and clean, but in reality, the Englishman would force himself on her any time he wished. During the time she was owned by the Englishman, Armanita gave birth to her first child, Emily. However, like Armanita's father, the Englishman did not consider Emily his daughter. She was just another household item. In time, the Englishman grew bored with Armanita and her crying baby, so he sold them for what he felt was a good price to a family in the southern state of Georgia. At the age of 14, once again, Armanita was placed on the back of a horse-drawn cart, only this time with a baby, still uncertain of what the future would bring her next. The family in Georgia had two grown sons, and it was the eldest, Frances, that Armanita was bought for. She was to keep the bedrooms neat and clean, but in reality, she became Frances's concubine. Every morning, she would go into his room to make up his bed, but in reality, she was made to stay much longer than required. During the years Armanita was in Frances's house, she had 7 children by him. Time went on. A war came and went, and slowly emancipation occurred throughout the country. But life still remained the same for Armanita. On paper, she was free, but in reality, she was not. She had 8 children and had no money in her own name. She was just as trapped as she had been before emancipation. But life often brings us changes when we least expect it. The parents of the 2 sons died, and the youngest son moved to the north, never to be heard from again. Over time, Frances took ill and eventually passed away. For reasons unknown to my family, whether for love or guilt, Francis, on his deathbed, made an amendment to his will in which he left the entire plantation to Armanita. Because he was not married and had no family and children other than the 7 by Armanita, there was no one to contest the will. In a very unorthodox fashion, the small town of Washington, Georgia, did not contest Francis's last request. Therefore, Armanita went from being a slave to freedom to eventually becoming a property owner. I suspect you are wondering what Armanita did with the property. She continued to operate the plantation and used all of the money from it to send all of her children to the first universities to accept Black students. Her children became the first store owners, formally ordained clergy members and academics in my family. Her children then sent her grandchildren to integrated universities in the North, and they became the first lawyers, teachers, and PhDs in my family. Her grandchildren sent her great-grandchildren to the Ivy League universities, such as Yale, MIT, Chapel Hill, and Duke University. And the great-grandchildren sent her great-great-grandchildren to universities all over the world. Some of my cousins have studied in Japan, others in France and in Mexico. Myself, I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago. What I most deeply admire about my great-great-grandmother is that she did not let her enslavement, sexual abuse, or racial discrimination stop her determination. She transformed her pain and suffering into something wonderful for her descendants and for herself. Although Armanita will never make the American history books, her name and life live within us, her family, and hopefully now within all of you. So I would like to take this time to say thank you to Armanita. I would not be where I am today without you.
And that is the story. I will say that this story just kept me going after I had experienced my own trauma. And one of the greatest joys of my life was not only becoming a social worker, but becoming a medical advocate with back then RVA, now Resilience. And every time I went on a shift, every time I took a call, I thought of my great great grandma. And I thought it was my way of thanking her for using her situation to reclaim her love for all of us. And you see why I had my mom read it. She has a beautiful reading voice. She's a retired English professor. And I was like, you have to read it. It's my words, but you have to read it. So it was great working in tandem with her. And thank you for letting me share this with you. I know my family's narrative is not original. I know many people have similar stories, maybe even more powerful, but I am grateful to this person for all that she did for me. And I'm already seeing validations. Thank you, Anna, Francesca, and Jacqueline for thanking me for sharing this story. Are there any questions? I'm happy to talk about this if you have any, and if you don't, that's okay too. And again, I'm sorry if it was triggering in any way. I don't know people's experiences. Thank you, JJ. You said, wow, beautiful words. Thank you. All of which are true. Thank you, Hema, for the validation. And yes, I would love it if my mom would read things. She's actually thinking of getting into audiobooks. So I'm just going to say that. She's actually been taking some classes. Thank you, Hema. Definitely. She will appreciate the validation. Hema said she should, and she will love you for that. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for saying that the story will live on with you and your children. We talk about this at Thanksgiving when we could have Thanksgiving. So the story comes up. Alexandra asked, hello to both you and your mom. Oh, my mom with your professor. Oh, I will tell her, Alexandra. Thank you for sharing. Definitely. Yeah. Oops, I don't know what happened here. Well, looks like the screen share ended.
Anna is asking in the chat, how did your mom feel reading your story?
Good question. I asked mom about that, and she felt very empowered. So my mother is a baby boomer who grew up during the civil rights generation. She's on the younger end of the baby boom, so she wasn't at places like Pettus Bridge and all, although some of her cousins were older and were. So she felt like, look, the reality is this is what has traditionally happened, particularly to people of color. And as a result, it needs to be discussed. And the more we talk about it, the more we emphasize the survivor story as opposed to the victimization piece. And so she felt it was very empowering. And she's very proud of her, because this is her great grandma, very proud of her. And that's how she felt. But that's a really great question. Are there others? Let's see. Thank you, Diana, for your words. Do others have similar stories that I know I don't know how much time we have, but do people have similar stories or family experiences? I'd love to hear. And I'll put my email in there because I'm always open to just chatting about this. Bring it in now. Oh, great. I have plenty of time. Thank you, Tere. Okay. I just put my email in. I will say, Francis, I don't know why Francis did what he did for Armanita. I don't know if he felt guilty. I don't know if he became enlightened. I don't know, whatever it was, if it was a tax write-off, I don't know. But it's just an interesting piece. It's interesting to me how even after we do horrible, horrible things to people, sometimes it just hits us, wait, this is a person. And I don't know, maybe that's how I'm framing it. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but that's kind of what happened with him. And we still own the plantation. It's in Washington, Georgia. I have not seen it. That's one of on my bucket list. I was actually planning to go, then COVID hit the world. I still have relatives down that way. I'm related to several of the families down there, Colling, Fanning, Gottrail, I could go on. And there's quite a lot of documentation, not so much on the African American folk who are from there. I've seen more on the European American folk. So hopefully this can start to change that narrative. Armanita, my great great uncle, who lived to be about 100, remembered her because she didn't die till the early 20th century, and he was a little boy, and he remembered her, and he said that she was a very anxious and efficient person, very kind, but she didn't smile a lot because that's how the trauma played out. So he said that she was very attentive to all her children, her grandchildren, and apparently she was like very like, oh, I have to keep the house clean, this is my thing. It's where she got a lot of her, I guess, self-care from in a way, but she was a very anxious person. So that's her bit. But all of us went on to university. Like my mother said in the story, we went on to get PhDs, law degrees, like many African Americans during that time. And that's a part of the narrative that's often forgotten, that post-Reconstruction era. However, this trauma has really informed our family. It's both put us, like many, I think, African Americans and other groups, in a weird place because we're related to both the abuser and the person who was harmed. And so it's like, how do you reconcile that? So, and then myself as a survivor, I won't speak about other people's stories, but I'll talk about my own. It's like, well, this is both restorative in my own healing process, that I have it within me through this ancestor, but at the same time, it's also hurtful that once again, even like 100 and something years later, I too was targeted. As both Francesca and Manson said in their presentation earlier, African American and Indigenous individuals are often stalked at such a higher level, and I'm both. So I think this kind of got me into thinking about that. Thank you for sharing your experience, Diana. I'm sorry you experienced that. But good job on gaining your master's in social work. I think that's fantastic. I think there's a great restorative element to all of us gaining that element. What about others? Are there other questions or comments? These are beautiful. In case you're wondering what happened to Emily, she ended up running a chicken farm. She was really into chickens and keeping bees. And she ran a chicken farm and kept bees. She remained single by choice. And then when my great grandma, her sister, died of uterine cancer in the 20s, she fostered two of my grandma's siblings. My grandma was not fostered by her, but she did foster two of them. And apparently she was just the sweetest person. I have a picture of her that was from the 1920s or 30s, right before she died. And it's in front of her chicken farm, which she was so impressed, proud of. And from all accounts, she did very well. Like, she was very happy with her family. I don't know how they processed the abuse, the abandonment, because I think, these are people, but generations didn't always talk about those things, and they certainly didn't make it into the family lore. But every picture I have of her, she's smiling. So, and it seems authentic. So I feel like she found a way to reclaim her healing. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to relinquish the space. I really do thank all of you for being here, for sharing your stories, for allowing me to share this. And I'm always happy to send this out to anyone if they want to keep it or share it with other people. this was just very healing for me each time we talk about this. And Arminita gets to live on, you know, because she deserves this recognition. So thank you for basically providing restorative justice and a safe space for my ancestor too. So with that, Mado, drawing my other ancestral language, and I will turn it back over to Tere.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's all take a moment to sit with the life experiences that were just shared into our space. Sit and feel how your body is processing it all. Take a deep breath if you need to. Thank you again for joining us over these next 2 days. I hope you enjoy our conference. If you need any assistance throughout the conference, please message either me or Luce. She's here under the network, as you can see. We're going to take a break. We're ending a little early, which is beautiful. So we'll have about a half hour before our first session at 11:30. Thank you, Munson, for dropping that. Beautiful. Bye, everyone.